Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about bands I find unlistenable. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. I should preface all this by saying I know music is very subjective. It's probably the most subjective form of art that we have. You could take 100 people, put them in a room, all 100 of them are going to have vastly different musical opinions. And so I know some of the stuff I'm going to talk about are probably some of your favorite bands out there, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way about a lot of the bands I love. And some of these bands were just a flat-out no the first couple of times I listened to them. Others, because of how influential they are and how many recommendations I get for some of these bands, I've tried a bunch of different times to listen to them. And for one reason or another, I just can't do it. So the first one necessarily isn't a band. It's more like a group of albums by a band. And it's a band I love. I love a lot of their music, but there's big sections of Pink Floyd's career that I just can't listen to. I'm not a big fan of the first couple of albums. Piper the Gates of Dawn, there's not a lot there. It's probably one of my least favorite albums. The album that their second album, which is Saucer Full of Secrets, isn't a whole lot better. You know, those are the first two albums with Syd Barrett. But after that was released, you had more Ummagumma and Atom Heart Mother come out. And there's just nothing redeeming on those albums. A lot of those songs just kind of meander on, don't go anywhere. They're boring. They're weird. They're just, if I wasn't a completionist, especially when it came to Pink Floyd, I would never own out any of those albums. I haven't listened to at least more in Ummagumma in years. I listened to Atom Heart Mother not that long ago, probably within the last year or so, just trying to listen to some of the stuff on there and kind of giving it another shot, but it's just bad. And, you know, I think those three albums are hands down, far and away, the worst things that Pink Floyd ever recorded. And I'll kind of put A Momentary Lapse of Reason in there also. Outside of the early psychedelic stuff, outside of those first two albums and more Ummagumma and Atom Heart Mother, outside of that early period, those first five albums, I think what they did with Momentary Lapse of Reason is the worst outside of that. It's not even a Pink Floyd album. It shouldn't have been called Pink Floyd. It was basically a David Gilmour solo project, brought in a lot of session musicians. Nick Mason, Roger, and Richard Wright had little to do with the album. And that's why I said it shouldn't even be considered a Pink Floyd album. I know a lot of people out there love that album. It's kind of the album that kind of jump-started their career in the middle part of the 80s. But, you know, going back through there and just listening to that and comparing it to all the other albums of their career, it quality-wise, it just isn't there with a lot of the other albums. Another really popular band that I have never been able to get into, I tried a bunch of times, is AC/DC. So I love the most of the Bon Scott era. But after his death, I think really the band probably should have ended with Bon Scott. The Brian Johnson stuff is, at best, just okay. It's kind of mostly boring. A lot of it all kind of sounds the same. Yeah, there's some hits every once in a while in there, just a very small handful. But, you know, a lot of the stuff I've gone back through it over the last couple of years, especially since their last album came out. And it just isn't good. And I think that if the band, if it... And I think if Angus Young hadn't been in the band, I don't think AC/DC would even be around anymore. No one would have heard of the band after Bon Scott's death. I know everyone always holds up Back in Black as a great album. I think there's a lot of good stuff on that album. You also have to remember a lot of that album was recorded, or at least partially recorded, before Bon Scott's death. So you always kind of have to throw that into the mix also. I think of the Brian Johnson era, Razor's Edge, I think, is probably the best of that grouping, and I think what they did on that album really kind of pales in comparison to the earlier stuff with Bon Scott. So I'm sure I'll get a bunch of comments on this next one, but it's Iron Maiden. I've listened to a lot of their stuff. I should say that I've never listened to either of the pre-Bruce Dickinson albums. And I've had a lot of people say, hey, look, if you can't stand Bruce Dickinson's vocals, go back and listen to the earlier stuff, the first two albums, and maybe you'll have a different opinion. Because musically, I think they do a lot of really good stuff, even though a lot of it kind of sounds the same. And some of it's kind of like cookie cutter metal and not so great cookie cutter metal. It's really Bruce Dickinson's vocals. I just can't get past that. And as much as like I said, there have been some stuff throughout their career that I'm like, okay, that's an okay song, but it just the vocals, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. And there's really no denying their influence. They're a hugely influential band. I know, and probably why I kind of feel that's kind of cookie cutter in a lot of ways is because there's a lot of metal bands that copied what Iron Maiden did. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they're not an influential band. It just the vocals for me I just can't get past. Staying with metal is Megadeth. I've always looked at Megadeth as more of a bad ripoff of Metallica. And Dave Mustaine's a good guitarist, and I think his guitar work in some of those songs is probably the best part of Megadeth. But kind of going through their career and going through a lot of the stuff, and even a couple of the big hits that they had, like I said, I've always kind of, and maybe it's because I knew that Dave was part of Metallica when it started, but I just have always kind of linked those two together and kind of comparing those two. Even the greatest Megadeth songs are not as good as the worst Metallica songs. And it's a band that I've just never understood the hype behind. I know a lot of people every year push for them to be part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and like I said, just a band that I've tried a bunch of different times over the years, especially since when I was younger. I was a big Metallica fan, and those, like I said, those bands were always kind of linked together, and I just kind of time and time again tried to listen to Megadeth, and it just wasn't there for me. Probably the one band I've tried to listen to the most. I've had a bunch of people recommend different albums to me and try to listen to this live material, and I just can't get past the vocals is Rush. And I know there's a lot of people out there that love Rush. Geddy Lee's vocals, though, it's just a full-on stop for me. Musically, they do a lot of really good stuff. Neil Peart is one of the greatest drummers of all time. And even though all the great stuff that they do musically in it just can't get me past Geddy Lee's vocals. And I guess I should add, it's not just the vocals. The lyrics of these songs are kind of boring and kind of dull and lifeless, and I think had the band had a different lyricist and a different lead singer, I would probably feel a lot different about the band. The next one's probably one of the more polarizing bands in rock history, and that's Steely Dan. I think Asia's an okay album, and it's easily the best thing that Steely Dan ever did. But Steely Dan is one of those bands where I kind of look at them as almost like the Nickelback of the 70s. They're too like pop for rock, and they're too rock for pop and jazz. Like, it was just this weird kind of fusion that I don't think really worked on most of their tracks. Like I said, I've got Asia on CD, but that's really the only album of theirs that I can even get through. And speaking of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Nickelback is an easy target. Everyone always beats up on them, and they're a band that I probably haven't tried. I probably haven't given them a fair shot over the years outside of a couple of albums. But I just can't even get through those albums, even their more popular stuff. They're just very vanilla. They're very boring, kind of plain lyrics. And I think it's kind of where rock music was in the early part of the 2000s. And I think they were kind of a symptom of rock music, and that is that all these labels were getting bands, and they wanted bands that were kind of watered down, generic, more disposable bands that they kind of use up and cast aside. And Nickelback just kind of stuck. And I understand they're one of the most popular bands of the last 20 plus years, but when I think of just boring, plain rock music, Nickelback is one of the first ones that come to mind. And then there's bands out there that I think are just asking to be hated by fans. So you got a band like Limp Bizkit, who is very mediocre at best. The way I've always looked at them, so by the end of the 90s, I was about 20 years old, and I looked at Limp Bizkit as a band that made music for douchebags. Was really the best way to put it. There's not a single song from the band that I enjoy. Very cringeworthy songs by a band that is fronted by probably one of the worst people in rock music in the late 90s, early 2000s, and Fred Durst. Just there's not a redeeming quality in the band. And then there's bands out there that I really don't know why I dislike as much as I do. I don't really have any one particular reason. A band like Queensryche is a great one to throw out there. Operation Mindcrime is an album that is always brought up whenever people talk about great concept albums. And time again, I've tried to listen to this album. I can't get more than halfway through it before I'm done with it. And it's not, the vocals aren't great. The vocals are one of those things that maybe it just kind of wears on me for after a little while. I'm not a huge fan of the vocal style of the band, but musically, it's just, I don't know. Like I said, just nothing ever clicked with me. And as soon as one of their songs come up, I know exactly who they are, and it's an instant pass for me. And then the last band on my list is Dream Theater. They're another one of those bands that I don't really have anything against. I think my biggest issue with the band, and I will say that Mike Portnoy is one of the great drummers in rock history. I like musically a lot of the stuff they do. I just think their songs kind of drone on for way too long. You got a 6 to 8 minute song. When you listen to it, a lot of times it feels like a 15-minute song. I guess that's kind of my issue with a lot of their music. It just kind of goes on and kind of meanders on, sometimes almost meaninglessly. A lot of their songs kind of start out really good, but I feel like kind of lose their way partway through. Because like I said, there's really nothing in particular with the band. I like the vocals. I like the music. It just... I think it's kind of like I said, it just kind of goes on for far too long, and it's not really a length of song issue for me, because there are longer songs like Echoes from Pink Floyd, which is over 20 minutes long. I think is a great song. The way that it progresses, I just feel like a lot of Dream Theater's music is just kind of, had they trimmed out maybe a couple minutes off of it, I might feel a lot different about their music. All right, well, that's it. That's all I got for you today, guys. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Tell me why I'm wrong, that I'm completely out of my mind with some of these picks. But, like I said, music is very subjective, and we all have our own opinions, and that's just kind of the way I look at just my honest assessment of some of these bands. Like I said, some of them I think I've got good reasons to dislike. Others, maybe not. Maybe I'm kind of nitpicking on some of them, but let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.